Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is Season 10, Episode 1. What a long, strange trip it's been. I can't believe we're already at Season 10 already, and I just feel like we just started this. It's just been amazing. So many wonderful guests to talk to. Not the least of them is Jerry James Stone, who I got to talk to. Jerry James Stone is a blogger and a vlogger and an author. And he's been on TV. He's been all over the place. He's contributed to the Atlantic, Discovery Channel's Tree Hugger, and Animal Planet's and Make magazine, as well as he's written several books, including Holidazed, a vegan survival guide for the holidays, made with coffee, and more. And he's always doing more. He's working on a new comic book that he's doing. He is everywhere, and for good reason. He's a very affable, knowledgeable guy, and if you have read his blog or watched his YouTube videos, you can know he's fun and full of information. I really don't know why a food channel hasn't picked him up to get his own show, because he really should be out there on television, on the cooking channel, or having his own travel cooking show, just something, because he's really wonderful, a great speaker, and again, full of knowledge. That being said, I'm going to go right to my conversation with the wonderful Jerry James Stone. Again, episode 1, season 10. Wow, what a benchmark. We've really come this far. It's been so fun to be able to interview people and talk to so many great chefs and food writers and more. It's just been really great. Here we go with my conversation with Jerry James Stone. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today I'm talking with Jerry James Stone, an American food blogger, vegetarian chef, activist, and internet personality known for simple gourmet recipes, advocacy for sustainable food and wine movement, and the social media personality. You've probably seen him on TikTok, Instagram, and maybe not even have known it. In 2015, a Sierra Club magazine article named him one of the 9 chefs changing the world. Jerry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Did you have any cooking mentors growing up? I know that I've talked to many people on the program, and everybody has stories about a grandmother, a grandfather, a parent, uncle or aunt that kind of influenced them as far as food goes. How about you? Did you have anybody that kind of influenced you food-wise growing up?
Yeah, I would say my family, like for the most part, probably directly, like and immediately my mom. So my mom is full-blooded Armenian, and my dad's this, he passed in 95, but my dad is this small town guy from Pennsylvania. And so our food was like always this kind of intersection of meat and potatoes, and then like dolmas and lahmacun and like, Armenian foods. And so my mom really liked to cook, and like everyone, like, her sister, my cousins, they all loved to cook. Even my dad, he was not as prolific as my mom and her side of the family, but he definitely cooked on his own too. And so I just grew up in a family that loved to cook, and we were poor, so that was part of it too. Like, cooking is cheaper, healthier, and so I was surrounded by people that loved good food.
Now you ended up living in the Bay Area. What brought you to the Bay Area?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Sacramento, California. So going to San Francisco in the Bay Area, my whole life, anytime we had family or friends visiting, we obviously took them there. And then I went there a lot myself. And the Bay Area had just always felt like home. There was just something about the culture there, the vibe there, this, affinity for organic and sustainable and planet-friendly stuff. And, this kind of, bucking of trends. And, obviously there's a huge vegetarian and vegan movement that's been there for quite a long time, and so just the culture of the Bay Area around like growing food, and then also like kind of like that expression when they make food, just also really resonated with me. And so I wanted to be a part of that.
So what part of Sacramento are you from? I live near there. I live actually in Mountain House near Stockton. So what part of Sacramento are you from?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Citrus Heights area, but I currently live in downtown Sacramento.
Nice. I love Sacramento. It's got an amazing food scene. Of course, you've got all the vegetables from the San Joaquin County, so you can't go 100%. Wrong there.
Yeah. People don't understand that too. I think like, it's Sacramento is a little bit of an underdog kind of city for the, being the state capital and everything. And, I think it was like the Lady Bird movie that said it's like the Midwest of California. But we grow all the food. We have a really vibrant food scene here, and it's nice. It's nice.
I always like to tell people I live in the Washington state of California, and then they are able to get it and grasp it. At what point did you decide that you were a vegetarian?
I first I would say so. That happened in high school. I was like a junior in high school when I kind of first started exploring that. And growing up, we had a decent chunk of property, and my parents let me have every animal that you could possibly let a kid have. And but I never really thought about not eating meat. Like I mentioned, my dad was a meat and potatoes kind of guy, and my mom cooked a lot of Armenian food, and it just never really occurred to me that you could not eat it. And then I met someone in high school, and her parents were these kind of Woodstock hippies, and they had raised her vegetarian, and I was like, oh, I can not do that. And I've always was like a kid that loved his veggies. And so I just tried it. I was like, oh, okay, I'll just stop eating red meat and see how that goes. And if I want to go back to it, I'll go back to it. So it was really kind of early on more of an animal rights type thing. It was like, I'm not eating my cats, dog, bird, turtle, rabbits, or anything like that. So why am I eating chickens, cows, that kind of thing. And it just sort of evolved from there. I went from, not eating red meat to not eating chicken to not eating pork. And I just never really, went back to it or had a desire to go back to it. And then, the reasoning behind it kind of evolved over the years. It started out as more of an animal rights thing. And then, there's sustainability behind it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was driving with my wife yesterday, and we passed a herd of cows, and I was looking at them, and they just look so adorable. I thought, if I actually had to butcher my own meat, I could become a vegetarian, because I couldn't. When you buy it in plastic, it's one thing, but when you see them and they have the long eyelashes, there's just I couldn't do it. I don't know how people do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I know. I feel you. And that's kind of, that association was hard for me to really deal with. Like when I was, in high school, I was kind of like, oh, as I kind of really thought through it more, it was like, oh, I don't want to eat chicken because now I'm thinking about the chickens, and I don't want to eat pork, that sort of thing. And so, it's, and it's not for everyone. I try not to grandstand about being vegetarian or anything like that. I really try to come up with recipes that just show people that, hey, vegetarian food can be fun, colorful, tasty, and just try something new.
Now, watching your videos and reading your work, I feel like you have undeniable knowledge of food and wine. Did you go to culinary school or get any kind of training?
I didn't, I just, I think early on, the thing with being a vegetarian, and just to date myself, the thing about being a vegetarian in the late 80s is that there weren't a lot of options. Today people are, a lot more blessed when it comes to that stuff. We have obviously Impossible type meats, and, there's just more vegan and vegetarian options. But luckily enough, I grew up in a family that liked to cook. So I just had to figure it out. So I just have always kind of had that figure it out type mentality. And before I got into food, my first career, I was a software engineer for the Department of Defense. So there's just a part of me that likes that geekery and just hacking stuff. And so I always say that I'm not an expert because I sit there and figure it out in my kitchen, and obviously things change as you learn more information. Sometimes things change, and but I like to just spend time in the kitchen and tinker.
Do you think because vegetarian has changed and evolved so much that a lot of vegetarians have had to have a lot of knowledge about food in order to make what they kind of wanted to eat, and kind of make it different now all the time?
I think that, yeah, I think the people that have been more successful at cooking have been more successful at being a vegetarian. I do meet a lot of people who are like, hey, I tried to be vegetarian. I lasted about 2 years, but they just didn't know how to cook, and they didn't know how to cook vegetarian. And so they just set themselves up to kind of fail. They're sort of living off cheese pizza and that kind of thing. And so I think it's definitely a challenge. And I think that these days with there being more options, it's a lot easier, to like kind of take that on. But I think also it's not as hard as sometimes people make it out to be. But as you probably know, I think sometimes people make cooking harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. When did you decide you wanted to start your blog?
Gosh, it was such a bumpy road to that. So basically, I had left software and I had started, I kind of was transitioning careers and I became an environmental blogger because I've always been focused on sustainability and the environment. And I had landed a gig where I was mostly writing content for the blogs at Discovery Channel. So I wrote stuff for like Animal Planet, Mythbusters, all that kind of stuff. And with like a sustainable focus. And I'd been there long enough that they kind of asked me, I was pretty successful at it. Like I was good at finding a good headline. And so they had asked me what I wanted to do. And I wanted to start a sustainable food and wine blog because at this point, like this was like 2000, I don't know, I'm going to say 10 or 11. And, sustainable wines had been coming out, but they were so bad. It was like these wineries that were they were so focused on the sustainable aspect, which I totally respect. But being a good wine was sort of left to the wayside. But there were a bunch of wineries that like farmed their vineyards in this old world way that were sustainable. They just weren't being like, they were kind of in the closet about it, And so I really wanted to showcase those wines, showcase what they were doing, some of the interesting things that they were doing, because monoculture is always a challenge when it comes to farming. And so the vineyards were doing like really great things. And we had a chef that was doing vegan recipes with it. And I kind of eventually just decided to dip my toe because I love to cook and my recipes started to do well on Discovery Channel. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to start a YouTube channel and just make some videos and see how that goes. And it just kind of did well out of the gate. And so I just have kind of kept doing it, without a real plan.
Now, I always want to ask this question to a lot of people who write and feature food. Do you have taste testers or do you have people that are asking to be taste testers all the time?
Yeah, I definitely get people asking all the time. Usually on social media, that's always like that's sort of a running joke. But I do have, like when you're recipe testing, you might make something, a handful of times before you kind of get it to where you want. And so I have a good chunk of friends here in town that I just give food to because if you're recipe testing lasagna, you can only eat so many lasagnas, and so I have people that I give food to that kind of get feedback from. But for the most part now, I think like that was the taste tester part was probably more early on. I'm a lot more confident now than in like creating stuff. Like I've always created things that I like, but you never know how people are going to respond to it. But like now that I do recipes for Costco's magazine. I've done recipes that have been served at the hot bar at Whole Foods and that kind of stuff. And so I've done enough to know that like, because I have like a pretty weird take on food. Like it's definitely, in that sort of sustainable veggie space that like not everyone gets. And early on, I was probably a lot more insecure about that. But now it's, I feel like, okay, it's weird, but people will get it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming something that's more desired now. People are like, I want that too. Like, I think, whereas before people may have been kind of on the fence about it.
Well, totally. One of the early recipes that I did, I remember I did these celery popsicles, and my mom was visiting. This was when I was still in San Francisco. My mom was visiting, and I had a bunch left over, and I was like, "Do you want one?" And she was like, kind of hell no, like I don't want to celery pop, just sounds horrible. So she was not, because it was like the key flavors were celery, basil, and salt, but it was still a popsicle. And so I made it, and like it's now one of her favorites. Like she loves it, and she asks for it a lot, and it's just kind of like, it's sort of in that, not to totally equate it, but sort of in that like kind of Gatorade refreshing electrolyte space, as far as flavor profiles. And it's just, I think expanding how people think about food and pushing those boundaries. And, you can, the classics are great too. I'm not saying that, don't have those things, but I think showing people that you can do more is definitely where I like to produce my content.
Now, your blog name's a real standout. How did you decide on it?
Well, so there's the old name and now there's the new name, right? So like the old name was like, I'm sure, I think you're referring to Cooking Stoned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't call it that anymore. Because it was just so confusing for people because when I go to food shows, everyone thought I was high. And so, um, right, like, or I just get a bunch of questions about weed. I'm like, I don't know. Like, so basically what had happened is I was at Discovery Channel and I didn't, like I mentioned, I didn't really have a plan. So I was like, oh, I'm doing recipes for Discovery. I'm going to kind of start my own thing and just kind of see how it goes. And, I was just sort of being cheeky and like making a play on my last name, without really thinking about, I'm like in San Francisco. So like there's obviously a big weed movement there. And so,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I just kind of, it was just sort of a cheeky, like, haha. And then, but then like people started like watching my videos and I started getting invited to things and I started like doing partnerships and, like with Whole Foods and other places. And it was like, okay, I need to rebrand this as something that actually reflects like what it is. And I just couldn't come up with like a silly, like all the puns, like that was my only pun, like all the other ones I couldn't come up with. So I just went with my name.
Yeah, can't go wrong there.
Yeah. I figured I'm not going to want to change that, I hope.
Now, I really love, and I think a lot of people notice your photography. Do you do it yourself or do you have somebody that does the photography for you?
I do. That's actually one of the things that really got me into food blogging was because I think that there's with with vegetarian food, like the early blogs, kind of like the early like wine stuff, it was sort of the same thing. It's like a lot of the early vegetarian and vegan food blogs were just like brown and granola and they weren't tofu, like just not colorful, not appetizing on any level. And I'm like, the produce aisle is the most colorful section of the grocery store. Like that's
Yeah.
literally the taste the rainbow part of the grocery store, and I'm like, why are all these like vegetarian blogs so sad, and so like learning how to take photos and taking like food photos was kind of one of the things that really got me into it.
Now, do you have any photography tips for those of us who struggle? Like my food photography always ends up looking like some faded beige kind of mess. So for those of us who
It's
struggle,
yeah, it's the one thing that I found that really moves the needle more than anything else is just lighting. Get like, have a good lighting set that you can really like just illuminate, even like, because a lot of people will use natural lighting and then you get shadows and stuff. If you can get like, you just need a couple lights. Like I just use a couple LED panels, but they like make the kitchen look like it's daytime in my kitchen, and so just the amount of light that you can fill the room with, the more the better. And then you can always sort of edit down and color correct from there. But I think that's where most people kind of struggle, is not filling the room with enough light, and from there there's tweaking the camera settings and whatnot. But light is the one thing that if you just don't have enough, you're never going to get the shot.
now the Bay Area is a really big wine area. I mean, I don't think you can throw a rock without hitting a winery in the Bay Area, and
Yeah.
for good or bad. But there's a lot of people that have wine knowledge. I've lived in Napa. I live now near Livermore, that's got all these wineries now, and it's just everywhere. Now, when you started talking about wine, do you have any trepidation about that? Because there's a lot of people that are all experts now, and it's just like, did you feel it was kind of going to be a kind of scary space, or was it very natural for you?
I mean, I think for me, that was like part of the draw. And I think it's also just kind of part of, I hate saying it, but like my brand, how people, I hate that self-referential part of that. But like, I think with my brand, like it's just sort of like a guy figuring out stuff. And so I've always been like, I've always enjoyed wine and I wanted to just share like, just that everyday guy approach to it. And it doesn't have to be snooty. It doesn't have to, make you feel uncomfortable. Like you can just go in and appreciate it. And when I had started the food and wine blog with Discovery, Klein Cellars was the first winery that I interviewed. And I really just loved all of the sustainability that they were doing. And I got to work with them and they eventually had me develop a recipe for one of the back of their wine bottles. But it was just, meeting people who want to share that culture. I mean, there's definitely people that don't, and they want to make you feel like you don't know anything. But there are people out there, I think, in the industry, in the tasting rooms at the wineries that want to help you understand. And I'm a big proponent of like, you know what, just drink the wine that you like. It doesn't have to be some esoteric reason, or, like if you like it, like perfect, that's what matters. But I think for me, it was really just, I was just a guy figuring it out. And I think that was part of the approach.
Do you have any wineries that you recommend right now that are currently your favorites?
I definitely, I'm trying to think here. Tap my
Sorry,
brain.
that
So
was kind of a curveball question.
no, that's okay. It's okay. I definitely, I mean, like I said, I love Klein. I've drank their wine for a very, very long time. Before, they're actually the reason I kind of got into it. I was up there wine tasting with some friends for my birthday, and we went there, and then we went to dinner at the Girl in the Fig in Sonoma, which is one of my favorite restaurants in the area. And I was kind of like, I want to be in food. It was like, I'm like, this is where I want to be. People that are making delicious things and making delicious wines. So Klein is a great one. I really, really love Medlock Ames. They're like in the Alexander Valley area. They just do really beautifully executed wines. They all cellar like very well. So they're a great one. Unti is another favorite of mine. I'm always looking for an unfiltered wine. I just love the complexity of wines that are not filtered, because most people don't know this. Like, not all wine is vegetarian or vegan. Like, the fining process can be, animal based. They can use fish oils or, other animal based products to remove the particles in wine. So
I did not know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of have to know your winery a little bit. There's definitely resources out there for like listing like what wines are vegan, but even same thing with beer. Like they can use products that are, animal based. So if you are concerned about eating plant based, that's a thing. But Unti does these really just gorgeous unfiltered wines. I highly recommend them. I'm kind of drawing a blank from there. One of my favorite resources that I would check out is SIP certified. So you can go to their website, and they work with wineries and vineyards to make them sustainable. And so, and like, not just farming sustainable, they look at the farm workers, like, how they lift these people up that are doing this like skilled labor to grow your grapes, and that, how they're treated. And they look at like solar and, water use. And like, also, is the winery and vineyard, is their business model sustainable? Because if that's not sustainable, then you can't farm sustainably either. So if you go to SIP certified, I use them a lot for resources, and you can find green wines all throughout California to try, and a lot of them you'd be hard pressed to find something that's not tasty.
That sounds good. This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. In 2013, you published Holidazed, a cocktail cookbook for getting lit at Christmas.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you what inspired you to write this, but of course, if you've been through a holiday, you know why you were inspired to write this.
Right.
But what inspired you to write this?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. So I was doing one of my friends is the CEO of Phil's Coffee, if you're familiar with Phil's Coffee.
Oh, yeah.
And so we were going to do a book together, and we kind of went down the whole traditional route of like doing, the proposal and everything. And it just kind of kept getting like just off the rails in a way that we didn't like when we would talk to publishers. So we kind of put a pin in it. And then someone was like, hey, why don't you kickstart your own book? You can kickstart it. And I was like, oh, I never really thought about that. And so I kind of looked into it, and I was like, all right. So I just kind of reached out to my audience. I said, hey, here's like a couple topics, like, what do you want a book for? And the two most popular ideas were popsicles and cocktails. And it was around, by the time the book would have been done, it would have been the holidays. So I figured, cocktails was the better choice. And I just wanted to do something that was just me, and it was a great experience. I raised enough money to print the books. I've sold all the books that I printed. I think there's advantages to going through a publisher and disadvantages, and same with, a Kickstarter. The one thing that I think that is immeasurable about going through a Kickstarter is people feel invested in what you created. Like I had people come out. I did a little book tour through Whole Foods for that book, and I had people come out who had made it happen, who purchased 10 books and were just so excited to hang out and talk food. And I think it's just, not that you can't get that experience through a published book, but I don't know. It's just, there's something about I put their names in it, right? The people that donated, their names are in the book, and so it's they have a connection to it that's just really charming. And it was just, I wanted to do something that my audience wanted.
I've interviewed several people who use Kickstarters for books, and I feel like oftentimes these books have a lot more love, and they end up having a longevity that a lot of other books don't have.
Agree.
In 2015, you published a book with Ed Beagley, who I love. I just love him. It was a vegan survival guide for the holidays.
Yes.
And how did you conceive of this, and how did you meet Ed? Because he's just a god to me.
He is. Ed's. So I've known Ed now for, I guess, well, as you mentioned, 10 years. I met him through Discovery Channel. He had a show on their network called Planet Green. And then he and I just sort of became friends, closer friends over Twitter. And he's also someone when I go down to LA, I see quite frequently. He is the nicest human in the whole world. He's just, you'll never meet a guy who's nicer than Ed Begley Jr. He just resonates it, and there's just a kindness to him, and he's always up for whatever. He just likes to create, that's just part of his DNA. And so and he loves to cook. I was actually down there at his house in November. He had me over for lunch, and he's come by, just come by for lunch. I'll make something. And he made 3 different soups. And I'm
wow,
one would be enough. But but no, he was here's 3, pick one, and we both love spicy food. So we connect on that level, but he's just a really sweet, nice man. And I just wanted to do something with him. I interviewed him a few times on my channel. I did some vegan recipes there. And so we did that book. I would love to do another book or something with him. And again, he's just, just one of the best humans, and I often ask myself in the sustainability space, what would Ed Begley do? It's because he really is that guy.
We should all aspire to be like Ed Beagley. I think we'd have a better America if that was the case.
I agree. I think that if we were all more like Ed Begley, a lot of the stuff that we're facing now wouldn't be a problem.
Do you follow any of his films? Because I think he's freaking hilarious. Oh my God, his work on Arrested Development makes me cry. And on A Mighty Wind, he was so good.
So yeah, no, I've seen a lot of his stuff. In fact, I always joke with him about, because I'll text him I'll be watching something, and he has a bit part on almost every TV show I think I've ever watched. It's he just shows up at some point, and I'm oh, look, there's that bagel, and I'll text him and and he's just so charming and nice. And I actually I saw him was it about a month ago. This is sort of a total random story, but another good friend of mine that I met through Twitter is the Olympian Greg Louganis. And
oh, wow.
So I became friends with him, and he was telling me, actually stayed at his house at the end of last year, and he was telling me that he didn't know that I was friends with Ed. He had saw it on social media, and so a photo of us, and so he told me oh yeah, years ago when he lived in Malibu, he had become friends with Joanne Carson, I think that's her name. And so she invited him over for an Easter dinner thing, and it was just a small crowd. So Greg didn't really know what he was getting into, and he shows up because they were both animal people. They're both dog people, and so he shows up, and it's Joanne, Greg, Betty White, and Ed.
Oh, wow.
And it was just this really small, intimate dinner of like just those four. And Greg's like, I haven't seen him since. And so I was like, oh, well, next time I'm in LA, like we'll all get together. I'll get us all together. And so like when I was down there, not this past week, but before, like Ed had us over for breakfast, which, and again, made way too much food for everyone, yeah, which it was just really interesting to like, I feel blessed to be able to like call those legends friends. Like it was just like being in that conversation was like, it's like, how did I get here? So, um, but they're just great people. And yeah, I love his stuff. I love his stuff.
Now, as a Java junkie, I was very interested in your 2017 cookbook, Made with Coffee, a cookbook for coffee
Yes.
lovers, caffeine addicts, and foodies. So, you talked about the CEO of Phil's. Was that how you were inspired to do this cookbook?
Yeah, we kind of came back around to the idea. We decided to just kind of like revisit it now that we had done the successful Kickstarter with my holidays one. I was like, okay, like let's do this one. And so we kind of, we really wanted to create a book that, if you have the book, like it shows you kind of like the Phil's blends and kind of talks through that a little bit and kind of just talks about coffee culture in general. But we really wanted something that just kind of showcased that you can like cook with coffee and it's not just like dessert stuff, right? It's like, of course you can make
Yeah.
brownies. Everyone's made coffee brownies, but we really wanted to show this other side of it, so we had a lot of things that were more like on the savory side, not that dessert's not part of the equation, but and it was just really fun. It was like probably if I'm being honest, my most challenging thing ever. I don't know if I'll ever cook with coffee again. And as far as a recipe developer part goes, like it's just, it was difficult. It's coffee has an acidity to it and you don't always know how it's going to shake out. And, like usually I feel like I can lock down a recipe in 3 to 5 times, but, tries, but like, some of those recipes took like 10 or 12 tries to get it right. And if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out. It was just, um, it was a challenge, but I love the book. It was also really great to like kind of bring that coffee culture together.
I use coffee a lot in cooking, pretty much all the time. I always have a jar of espresso powder, and I'm always using it. But it is a little bit of a wild card,
It
and
is, yeah.
I know I could see how that would kind of add some like you'd be like, this could be a good idea, or it could be a really bad idea.
Right, right. And it's like it depends on like it can depend on like how long you're cooking the coffee in it, like what you're trying to get out of it, and just how it interacts with stuff. Like I'd have stuff where the acidity from the coffee would just clobber those bright notes that you get from like bay leaf or basil or something like that, and you're like, okay, so how
Yeah,
do I get around that? So I mean, it's the dessert part is easy. It works really well with dessert, as like
yeah.
milk and sugar and coffee. Like so that's a no brainer. But if you try to do the other stuff, you definitely have to work at it a little bit.
So we talked about this earlier, but who are some of the food writers that you really love? Who's inspired you in your writing and work?
One of my favorites is Sarah Moulton. I
Oh
just
yeah,
adore her. She's, I think her approach to food is so accessible and so like I always appreciate writers who make you feel like, hey, you can do this, and
yeah.
I think there's definitely, a part of like the food writing culture where it's like, look how much I can flex. And I faulted on that. Like my first the Holidazed cookbook, the cocktail one, I go back and I look at that and I'm like, I made this harder than it needed to be, you know? And so and it was like my first book and I wanted to flex, but like I think that, when I got around to making the coffee one, it was like, okay, like how can I make this really accessible? And so I just really appreciate that approach because I think like, making recipes that people want to make is like that's an honor, right? Like when people message me and say, hey, like, I've been making this particular recipe for our Thanksgiving dinner for the past 7 years, like you're now part of their narrative. And I can't even express how grateful I am to be in that position. And so I really enjoy her a lot. I think that she's super talented, really, really charming, and she just has a way with food that makes you think you can do anything.
So what's next for you?
Well, so last couple years ago, I launched a comic book cookbook, and
Ooh, nice.
yeah, so it's called Spooniverse Comics. It's like a comic book first. It's very much a like kind of cliche superhero story. It's set in the future, another cliche, and very post-apocalyptic in a way. The whole world is vegan because there's just a global warming has done its thing, and the goal behind it is really just to like educate kids around food. Um, I didn't realize how hard it is to write a comic book. I mean, I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't like. I now have like a newfound respect for anyone that's ever written a TV show, comic book, movie, any bad movie or bad TV show. I'm like, it. It was probably still really, really hard, And so,
Yeah.
like, but the goal with that is really like, my goal. I'm working on the second issue of that. It's taken me a while. It had some life hiccups with like the pandemic and other stuff, but the goal with that is really just to like get in front of kids and teach them about food culture. I get people who come to my YouTube channel and they're like, I don't know how to chop an onion, and I don't know how to boil an egg or, that kind of thing. And I'm not dissing those people. I mean, we all have our journey. And so I'm like, how can I get in front of people earlier and share food culture and make it fun and visual and teach them how to eat some like healthy, tasty, delicious, plant-based things. So Spooniverse Comics, that's where I'm kind of investing next, as far as taking things in just a different direction. Like most of my audience is adults, and now I'm going a little bit younger.
That sounds wonderful. Are you going to be going any like comic cons with that or anything now that free comic book month is coming up, or free comic book week, sorry, and
Yeah.
all that?
I mean, that's eventually the plan. I think like right now, like I need to, like, so writing a comic book is hard. And the thing, like also like with writing it, it's like, it's like there's a food narrative to the story because the planet's in this place where everyone's vegan, and trying to intertwine like, food culture and also recipes. I definitely bit off more than I could chew. And so I'd like to kind of like feel like I'm really knocking it out of the park before I go to a Comic Con, but they're definitely on my radar. There's so many here in the Bay Area and Sacramento
Oh
that,
God, yeah.
like I definitely want to, but it's, first I just want to feel like, okay, yeah, I nailed that. you know?
Now, I've known people who've written comic books or worked on them at least as artists too. And I think the one thing they all say is, they spend months on it and then somebody reads it in 5 minutes, they just want to kill them. Is that the case with you? Like it's a lot of work, right? I mean, from what I've
It
heard from
is.
people, it's a tremendous
Well,
effort, more than writing a
it's a
book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing that's really, I mean, it's kind of like writing a movie because you have to like be mindful of what you want to say visually and then also be mindful of what you want to say with your words, right? So it's like, with a book, you explaining it all. Obviously there's, you have to deal with pacing and all those other things. Not that writing a book is easy. I'm not trying to minimize it, but it's
Right.
just a different medium, and the reason I wanted to like do the comic book was to, help kids cook, but also I wanted to like build on something because I mean, as you know, in the food space, unless you're like Martha Stewart or Gordon Ramsay, like cookbooks kind of they have a shelf life, right? You put one out, like they're hot for like a year or two if you're lucky, and then they're not, and so and you put a lot of time into it. So I
Yeah.
wanted to build on something that I could just kind of keep snowballing, right? Keep adding to that environment, and that's kind of where the comic book came into play. And so, but it is hard. It is really hard. And, the kids that have purchased them so far said that they just like to pick it up and look at the artwork. And that makes me happy. I think
Oh, good.
that, hopefully they'll try a recipe. I know a few of them have. Hopefully they'll learn some stuff along the way. But, at the end of it, like, I'm just, like I was a comic book geek as a kid. I'm still a comic book geek. I don't know why I said that as past tense, but I'm still a comic book geek. And I used to pick them up and just look at them all the time, even when I wasn't reading them. You just want to get lost in the visuals. And that's why I was like, okay, how can I? Originally, I was just going to do a superhero based cookbook. And I was like, no kid's going to pick up a cookbook. And it's a pretty unique kid that's going to pick up a cookbook. And so I was like, how can I, get to the point where like kids just want to pick it up and look at it all the time? And that's kind of what it was. It was sort of an opportunity to, I think, create something. I mean, there's definitely food comic books out there, but a lot of them are, they're not about teaching to cook. I would say that's the one difference between Spooniverse Comics and the other ones that are out there. Like, not that others don't have recipes, not that they don't have, like, I mean, I think even like, Anthony Bourdain did some comic book food stuff, but it's not really like about teaching to cook. And that's really what I want this to be. I want this to be an opportunity for kids to like enjoy the story and then maybe learn how to chop an onion at some point.
Yeah, Bourdain's were great, but they're definitely not for kids.
No, they're definitely not for kids. No.
Do you have any favorite comic books? I used to be a comic book. I have 5 kids. I can't afford them anymore. So, do you have any favorite comic book characters or anything that you liked growing up?
Yeah. I've always been, and I'm always been a huge Wonder Woman fan. I love the character. Like, a lot of comic book lore is like just entrenched in tragedy, right? It's like Superman's planet blew up, or Batman's parents got shot, or Spider-Man's uncle got killed. Like there's just like all of this darkness around it. And the thing that I love about Wonder Woman is just very much like, hey, like, there's this war going on and I want to like help the world. It wasn't like personal tragedy. It was really more about like, inspiration and just wanting to like do good. And so I've always really liked that character a lot. And being a child of the 80s, like the camp Linda Carter show like was a childhood favorite.
It was wonderful. I mean, I love that. That's a touchstone. That's a touchstone for me. Have you met her on Twitter or anything?
I haven't. When she was doing a concert tour for a while, and we almost met when I was in San Francisco, but it just didn't pan out. So, but it's still high on my list. So if I can make that happen, I'm gonna still keep trying.
She seems super nice, like very accessible.
Yeah, I think like, I mean, you don't always get actors or actresses who embody the spirit of the people that they play, but I think like, you just see her and the way that, like, just the stuff that she does, like the trans activism that she does on Twitter is alone is inspiring. But now I haven't met that Wonder Woman, but I have met the Susan Eisenberg, who voiced Wonder Woman for the DC animated stuff. I have met her.
Oh, nice.
She's also very, very delightful.
Very nice. Jerry, it was wonderful talking to you today. Thank you for being on the podcast, and I hope we get to have you on again. Like I said earlier, I mean, you've got a lot here in your bio. I could be talking to you all day. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, no, I truly appreciate it. And maybe when that next issue of the comic book is ready, we can talk again.
That was my conversation with Jerry James Stone. You can get his books through the links in the bio, or go to his vlog or blog in the links in the bio as well. Go check his stuff out. You're going to love his YouTube videos as well as his blog entries and his books. On Friday, we're going to have a special guest. We're going to have Joel Berry, who is also Tavin Dillard. I know that sounds a little confusing, but there is a wonderful character on TikTok and on YouTube whose name is Tavin Dillard. You may have even seen him on Instagram. He's a character that is a Southern character who is really fun and just a real crack up. Joel Berry is his real life counterpart, who actually is the brains behind the character. And he's much more than that. He's a filmmaker, he's a scriptwriter, he owns his own production company, Sweet Tea Films. He is a Renaissance man. I love talking to Joel, and I just really love getting to talk to him about his character Tavin, who I just love. I bought merch. I just really enjoy the character so much. I hope that you get to check that out on Friday. Hope you had a good time today, and I hope that maybe you've made some recipes from some of the guests that we've had on the program. Until Friday, keep on cooking.